Littleton Public Schools is a dynamic and highly respected district serving approximately 13,000 students. The LPS Toddcast with Superintendent Todd Lambert is a venue for us to tell you all about the news, initiatives, events, and people who make up the LPS story.
Hello and welcome to this edition of the Toddcast. As always, I'm joined by my co-host and Littleton Public Schools CFO, Mr. Jonathan Levesque. Jonathan, what do we have going on today?
Well, we have a really cool topic. It's right up my alley. We're talking about legislation and school funding. But we
Did
have
you say that was a cool
here.
topic?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
I'm the CFO. I have cool topics.
I hear you.
We have a guest here, though, Dylan Peper, who represents Littleton Public Schools down at the Capitol.
It's great to have Dylan here today, isn't
Yeah.
it? Dylan, thanks for being here on this episode of the Toddcast. We always have a great time. This morning, we'll just ask you a few questions that'll be right up your alley. You have so much expertise on school funding in Colorado, and so we just appreciate you being a guest today. But before we get started, we always have an icebreaker question, and we always have John get us started on that, and you get to participate in that as well.
Wonderful.
All right, John, fire away.
All right. So if you could travel in time, would you go to the future or back to a specific time in the past? Dylan.
I think for me, I would go to the future. As quickly as technology is advanced, I can't imagine where we'll be in 50 or 100 years' time. So
Yeah.
I'd love to see it.
Yeah.
And so I'd go to the future.
Those flying cars were promised?
That's right. I
Yeah.
can't wait for it.
That's a tough one, because there are things in the past I'd love to go back and see. I think about my family members I haven't met, but I'm going to go with Dylan too. I think with the speed of change, I am curious at my age to fast forward another 25 or 50 years and just see what is going to happen.
Yeah, it seems like the big unknown, right? The future. We've heard the past in history class, right?
Right.
But I would go to the future too, see what's going on. So,
I think we'd be surprised, and I hope we'd be really happy about what we see, but you never know.
yeah.
Very good. Well, let's get us started with some questions today. Like we said, Dylan is the lobbyist for our group, works for Strategies 5280, I believe is the term of the group. And we just appreciate your support over the years for Littleton. You are such a great advocate for us at the State House, not only for the work you do down there, but also keeping us informed. I know John and I and others in the organization rely on you and your partners to give us the information we need to do the best we can. So again, thanks for being here.
Well, thank you.
What we'll do this morning is I'll fire a few questions at you, and you can share with the audience some of that expertise we're talking about and maybe your impressions of where we're going with the school funding here in 2025.
And
That
Todd,
sounds
do
good.
you mind if I set the stage a little bit
No, that sounds
on
really good.
state funding and where we are right now?
Okay, that sounds like a good
Before
one.
we get into the expertise, I want to just kind of set the stage for
You just said it was
everybody.
cool, and I'm excited about the topic, and I just want to get started.
Well, I'm going to throw some numbers at you
All right.
guys. So,
All right.
so the state is right now in a $1.2 billion deficit. They have gotten to be in this structured deficit over the last few years with federal stimulus dollars that they've put into programming over the last few years that have expanded programs. That funding is coming to an end, so there's this fiscal cliff that the state is actually experiencing, and they have to cut $1.2 billion out of a $16 billion budget. So that's caused problems because K-12 funding is 1/3 of the state's budget right now. Another third is Medicaid. So that is the 2/3 of the state budget go to education and healthcare. That is a big problem because those are big cuts to those big slices of the pie if they were done equally. Littleton Public Schools does have roughly 1/3 of its total funding from the state. The other parts of our funding at Littleton come from our taxpayers. That's about 50% come from our taxpayers, and then the other portions are pretty small state and federal grants. We did have a budget stabilization factor for the last 16 years. This current year, it has gone to zero. The legislator has worked really hard to bring that to zero, but I wanted to mention it because we've been withheld at Littleton $170 million over the last 16 years. And statewide, $10.2 billion was withheld from K-12. So that's really important because we've seen tough times before, but now we're looking down at a new budget this year going into 25-26 that could be really tough at the state level and for K-12. So that sets the stage of kind of where we're at, and now we can jump into questions that Dylan can answer, and I I can jump in as well.
Yeah, thanks for setting the tone for that. You mentioned about 170 million over that time. That's close to 1 year's budget in Littleton.
It is.
You think about that, that's a pretty daunting number over
Yep.
that time. So yeah,
Yeah, it's been rough.
appreciate the setup there, John. So Dylan, why don't we start with an easy one? Maybe talk about some of the key pieces of legislation that you see coming through the State House right now that's being proposed, and what the impact of that legislation will have on schools.
So starting with the biggest piece of legislation that impacts schools is the School Finance Act. Last year, for the first time since 1994, the state updated the new School Finance Act. So they got rid of the 1994 School Finance Act, and they created a new School Finance Act that was meant to be more student-centered, better addresses some inequities we've seen historically with the old Finance Act. But part of that promise of a new School Finance Act was a significant amount of new money. Over the next 6 years, they promised an additional $571 million of investment into K-12 education over what they were promised under Amendment 23, what we were promised under Amendment 23. The issue, as Jonathan just laid out, is we're $1.2 billion short. And when public education accounts for 30% of your state budget, when we look at shortfalls, it gets hard to protect education funding without being willing to cut other areas. And so the biggest piece of legislation that's going to impact K-12 this year is that implementation of the new School Finance Act. 2 or 3 things we're still waiting to see. We got a March revenue forecast a week from today.
Yeah.
That's what they set the budget off of every year. Barring any major changes, I don't expect that number to move around too much. I think we'll still be about $1 billion short this time next week. That means that over the next 2 weeks after that, a lot of decisions get made on how K-12 gets funded for the next 12 months. And these decisions, depending on what the cuts look like, have 5-year and 10-year impacts for not only K-12 but our students, in our communities. So that is the biggest piece of legislation that will impact K-12 this year.
Okay, so outside of the legislation, are there any particular things that are impacting the budget this year? You talked about some of the funding we've had. John set the tone for us on things we're paying for already. How are those playing with the budget this year?
The biggest thing that impacts the budget this year really is Medicaid and caseload growth. So 9 months ago, when they set our current year budget, they put a number in for Medicaid. That number's about $600 million more expensive than they initially forecasted. Unlike education, they have to pay that. And so we get reimbursed from the federal government. We have to put the money up first, and then they pay us back. So we don't have the option to do a budget stabilization factor for Medicaid.
Right.
We've paid that every single quarter throughout the year, and we're going to continue to pay it. Part of what Jonathan laid out of what impacts the budget is during the COVID time, we had an enhanced FMAP match from the feds. We got $140 million into the state every quarter to help pay our Medicaid costs. Well, that stopped, and now we're bearing the full weight of the additional programs and things that the state has added, and that's very expensive. So that is really an area that is driving a lot of our budget concerns in the state of Colorado.
Very good. One more. I'm going to ask one more, and then I know you want to jump in on a few things. We hear a little bit about the healthy meals for all of our kids, universal preschool. How are those playing out at this point with the budget?
So both UPK and Healthy School Meals for All were voter-passed initiatives.
Mm-hmm.
The voters were promised a level of service, and unfortunately what we've seen is that the money that's come in to fund those hasn't been able to match that level of service. So when the voters passed Healthy School Meals for All, we collected money for 18 months. That paid for 12 months of service. Now that we're using 12 months of funding to pay for 12 months of service, we're about $50 million short every single year. And what does that mean? Well, that means that you really have 2 options. Either we have to go back to the voters and ask for additional revenue to make up that shortfall, or we have to reduce the program to meet the dollars that the state has. If they don't do one of those 2, they are going to stick schools, I believe, with a bill and say, you know what, you have to find the nexus. You, Todd, thank you for the lunch. It's $3 million, and that's what they're going to do if we don't have a way to get new revenue. So they're going to put a measure up. They're going to say, voters, can we retain money? Can we increase? Can we increase taxes? And we'll see. I mean, we've historically not had a ton of success passing things like that. And we saw the same issue with UPK, where we about 18 months of collections to pay for 12 months of service, and school districts have bore the brunt of the additional costs above what the state's able to collect.
You know, and that's such a challenge because I think in general we agree with healthy meals for all of our kids. We know the impact that has on them for school, and we are certainly big believers in Littleton for universal preschool. We have a robust preschool program here, and we believe in the best conditions for our early learners. We just need to get that balanced out at the state level and not pay that bill in other areas.
Yeah, the state has to find a way to get better at forecasting how much money they really need. So when we go to these voters with these really good initiatives and say, here's what we're doing, we're giving lunch to everybody, how do we get a little closer to what the actual cost is so we're not left, having to figure it out on the back end 3 years later like we are right now.
Right, yeah. John?
Yeah, and it seems like there's been historically underestimating with some of those initiatives, so it is difficult to fund. So that was kind of the overview, at least on the outside. I want to dig down a little bit into the School Finance Act and averaging. So for the viewers out there, we are a declining district in terms of enrollment, and so we are allowed to average our enrollment over 5 years in the current School Finance Act. In the new Finance Act, they moved to 4-year averaging. But in the governor's budget, he initially mentioned that he wanted to bring us to essentially zero averaging or current enrollment. How do you see that affecting schools across the state?
So as we look at how averaging has been used, 138 out of 178 school districts have declining enrollment. It's not just a rural issue, it's not just a metro area issue, it's across the board. The areas in terms of percentage that we've seen have the biggest percentage declining enrollment is in rural areas of our state. So this doesn't just impact the metro area. Declining enrollment is a problem that we're going to continue to have to address here in the state of Colorado. It was meant to kind of stabilize and level out your guys' budget. So you didn't go from 1 year you have, plus 3,000 students, and the next year you lose 1,000 and you lose funding for 4,000 kids. That's very hard to budget to. As you both know, you don't lose all the kids in one class and get rid of all the expense all at once. You lose one kid from one elementary school, another from another, and your costs remain the same, but the number of students you're actually serving decline a little bit. And so this was really meant to smooth out everything for K-12 people providing education to students. That's really what it's done. If we want to look at funding every student that's in school every day, we can have that conversation, but we can't have that conversation without putting that money into the base education funding. I don't think anybody in the state thinks we overfund education. Essentially what the governor's saying with his proposal is that we are funding students that don't exist. I can guarantee you, and I think you guys would agree, every single dollar you get goes to funding students.
Absolutely.
Very much so.
There's no waste there. That goes to the students that are in class every day. So moving forward, the conversations with the governor and the speaker and others, every dollar that they want to pull out of averaging needs to be reinvested in our students.
And it really was a savings mechanism, right, that the governor and his staff were trying to implement to cover some of this $1.2 billion that they're down in deficit, right? Because it would have saved the state roughly $160 million going towards that deficit. My calculations, if they did bring us to zero or actual enrollment, Littleton itself would lose $5.7 million annually. So that's a big cut into our programs and our system. That's one area where I think we can voice our opinions to the state legislature and hopefully get some movement there to not go as deep as the governor's proposing.
I think a lot of people are advocating, and we've talked to you and your partners about our advocacy and what we need to do to bring attention to this difficult situation. Share some of the suggestions you have on what your average citizens can do that care about their school system, care about the future of their children. What can they do right now?
I think it's incumbent on all of us to tell them what these kind of cuts mean and keep it fairly simple. $5.6 million. I mean, Jonathan, I'd ask you, what does that mean for Littleton in terms of something everybody in the community could understand?
Roughly, it would be 56 staff members, right? People out of the classroom, out of the bus driver's seat, out of the main office, across the board, it would be a cut to staffing.
We've heard from other metro area districts, like Jeffco, for example, it's the equivalent of closing 8 elementary schools.
Right.
For Cherry Creek, it's the equivalent of getting rid of their transportation department entirely. those are serious cuts that will be felt in every community. These are cuts that can't be absorbed by any district in the state. These cuts are more acutely felt in the rural areas. The top 20 biggest percentage cuts are in rural Colorado. When they take 10, 11, 12% cuts, we will have school districts closing. And we don't say that to, make it sound like a catastrophe, but the reality is every decision that they make at the state level impacts you guys at the local level with K-12 funding. So as a community, I think it's incumbent to say we do support our schools, and we've seen great support from our community, and we expect the state to meet their obligation. As a lot of our community members have felt, costs have risen. Insurance costs have gone up, property taxes have gone up, but schools don't get to keep that extra money. So property taxes went up 17% statewide. School funding remained the same because the only thing that happened is the state share went down.
Right.
The state had to write you less of a check, but your funding stayed about the same. I don't think our community understands that. And I think it's important to say, you know what? We took some burden off the state. Everybody in the state of Colorado is paying more in tax. We need to continue to fund education. The reality is in 2000, education funding accounted for about 40% of the state budget. It's down to 29%. At some point, it is a priorities discussion. Where do you want your dollars to go? We are Tabor constrained in Colorado. We have been for more than 30 years now. So it really does become a priorities discussion on how do we fund the things that we want to fund. I've seen the polling, education polls very well.
You bet.
I think it's important for us to tell our community what the state is doing. The state's not meeting their job. They're not meeting it. And we want you to come and let them know.
So we are going to let them know. I'll share with our audience. We have a letter that's going to be coming out from me outlining some of the same things you've heard today on the Toddcast. That's some advocacy that we're putting out for sure, just to let our constituents know how they can reach their legislators and share their opinions about this. We share some facts as well. And also we're doing this episode of the Toddcast because we think this is such an incredibly important topic. So we definitely have a call for action out there. And John, I know we have Kids Matters too. You can just briefly talk about that. And
yeah, Kids Matters.
People know.
Kids Matter 2 / Littleton, and the 2 is TOO. You can go out there and use a formed email, but you can also change it up and make it your own if you wanted to. You just put in your address and it'll send it right to your representative at the state level. Another way you can contact your representative or legislator is go to our Board of Education website on the Littleton Public Schools website. You can find who represents you in your specific area. There's also a link there if you're not sure. You can put in your address and it'll tell you your representative. You can then get their contact information, email, phone number, and write them any topic you want.
That's great.
Let them know what you think and your opinions on funding. And if you need any more information, it'll be in our call to action coming out very soon. So
very good.
You can get there.
Thank you for that. I want to remind our listeners as we wrap up this episode of the Toddcast that we sure appreciate your suggestions, your feedback on topics that you would like to have. We do have a couple of upcoming events. In fact, one in particular. We have the LPS Foundation Spirit Celebration. That's going to take place on April 4th at Infinity Park. It's the traditional place. It's always a great event and a big fundraiser for us. John, I'm going to turn it over to you to bring us home.
And I just wanted to mention, if you want tickets, contact Steph Carroll at the foundation. She has tickets and tables still available.
Nice,
so
very good.
Get out there on our website and contact her if you want to get tickets to that event. It's really fun.
You bet it is.
Well, we have a last question to wrap up. What did you want to do when you were a little kid, when you grew up? What were you thinking that you wanted to grow up to be?
I wanted to be a firefighter. Kind of went the other way being a lobbyist, but I wanted to be a firefighter.
Now you just start fires.
Yeah, correct.
I envisioned a career in advertising or television or something. And I think when I was a little kid, I wanted to be a game show host. I thought that was the coolest job. And, you tape a few episodes during the day. It looked like a lot of fun. Of course, I'm matured since then. But, yeah, for my dream as a little guy, it was just to be maybe the next Bob Barker or someone like that.
I could see it.
Yeah.
I could see it.
And now you got the Toddcast.
Now we got the
I
Toddcast.
I wanted to be a vet.
Yeah?
Yeah. And then I figured out you had to actually do surgeries and stuff, and I was like, no, that's not happening.
That seems
I
really
just want to
hard.
be around dogs all day. So
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to wrap up today. I just want to preview our next Toddcast. We're going to have Mr. Desmond Grant. He is the Chief Technology Officer in Littleton. He handles all of our information technology. Desmond's in his first year doing a great job. He's going to join us on the next episode to talk all things technology. So we'll probably hear some things about AI, cybersecurity, and some of the programming we have going on for our students. So we're really excited about having Desmond and whoever else he brings with him. Dylan, we really appreciate you being here today. You're a wealth of information. We always appreciate your support. And on such an important topic, making time for us today is much appreciated.
Well, thank you guys for having me.
You bet. Until next time, John.
keep learning.